All right. Well, good afternoon, not afternoon, good morning, everybody. Just been a long morning already, so that's where my state of mind is. Hey, everyone. My name is Andrew Colson. I serve as one of our committee co-chairs for advocacy, government advocacy in the state of Alabama for SACAC, and I'm joined by Bailey Drummond. We were just standing here awkwardly in the State House. We're both coming from UAB and really glad for you guys to join us here virtually. And we are also really excited to just talk a little bit more about government advocacy today, as well as a little just bit more about some legislation going on nationally speaking, as well as statewide too. It's been a very active year in the legislature for the state of Alabama, not just the world of education, but a lot of stuff that's been coming on, some stuff controversial, some stuff, breath of fresh air. And so we kind of wanted to touch base on just providing some updates on that. Just as a quick reminder, part of our role is to be as nonpartisan, as non-biased, thank you, yes, as possible in our work today. So do keep in mind, we're going to keep things nice and informational. Obviously, we do want to focus a lot on those things that affect our day-to-day work as higher education professionals and secondary education professionals. So we'll definitely keep a focused lens on those things. Thank you so much for joining us today as part of our Advocacy Day. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, we wanted to start off first by just providing a quick introduction of today's agenda, just so that way we can let y'all know what's going on here today. Just as a quick reminder about what's going on today, I know I sent this out to our roster of attendees, and if you didn't get that yesterday, that's just because you may have registered after I sent out that email. But we'll start out today after our quick introductions here with an update from our panelist from NACAC, CJ Powell, who is Director of Advocacy, just with some basic NACAC policy updates, national spotlight on some things happening right now. Obviously, a lot of stuff happening in the world of education nationally, one of those big ones being FAFSA that I know we're all so greatly intimate with right now. We also wanted to provide just some quick SACAC updates. We won't spend too much time on that because there's not too much to provide that won't already be addressed in NACAC or our state talk as well too. Then we also have a CBO showcase. So in previous years, if you guys have joined us in the past couple of years for Advocacy Day, we have had different legislative speakers, typically one that's been very forthcoming with us, speak to us from the Alabama state legislator. But we decided this year to go with a little bit more of a local CBO feel to just kind of involve a little bit more CBO talk based on some feedback we received in the past. So we'll have Alabama Possible joining us. Chandra Scott will be joining us virtually. She was going to be here in person today, but unfortunately, she is sick. And so she'll be joined, I think, with maybe one other person from Alabama Possible around 11 o'clock or so today. And then finally, we'll have some legislative highlights as well, too. Just some quick things about things that are going on. This will not be comprehensive of every little thing. Try to be as exhaustive as possible. And also just wanted to kind of open up for a Q&A too. You should have access to that Q&A function on the panel. And so feel free to kind of just hop in there with any kind of questions or anything you wanted to ask or how to get involved as well too. And then of course, a little bit later today, we'll have a chance to chat with the legislators as well too while we're here in Montgomery. But I wanted to go ahead and pass this off since we are keeping nice right on time. Quick, just a little bit about who we are as government relations. I've kind of already mentioned this, but our main goal is to advocate for monitoring as well as advocating with legislators about federal, state legislative initiatives pertinent to college admissions and primary and secondary school counseling. And so we really do want to work as a committee of SACAC, as a subsection of NACAC, and just members of both organizations to do our best to inform our membership about things that are going on in our world of higher education and secondary and primary education as well too. And like I said too, those are our main duties. I've kind of already covered this, just went a little bit ahead in my head here. But yeah, so we are here to enact these legislative days as well as some webinars as well too, and provide those spaces for our members to communicate with each other and inform each other. And so quickly before I pass it off to CJ, just as a heads up, this is who our government committee are. So you do have both Bailey and I who are on the state level. We handle the committee for state of Alabama within SACAC. Then our SACAC co-chairs who are actually on the board with SACAC are Kelly Petkavich and Jade Demink. And so Jade is actually rolling off this next year, so there will be someone else in her place this upcoming year. But Kelly will be with us for at least another year after this. This is her second year in this role as well too. Kelly's based out of Memphis, Tennessee, and then Jade is based out of Georgia. And so if you're not part of SACAC or not involved in SACAC, hey, we've got a lot of opportunities coming up here fairly soon. And of course, if you're interested in government relations, you can hit one of us up. We're on the website. But with all that said, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to CJ to kind of get us started here and keep us on time as well too. But like I said, follow us on all of these, or rather connect with us on any of these different members or these different avenues as well too. But CJ, I want to go ahead and pass it off to you. I don't know if you needed to share your screen or anything like that, but you should have the ability to do so.
I can't share my screen, but I can also follow up with the slides. It's
Yeah.
not that they are
Yeah.
not what I'm talking about. So no worries there.
Of course.
Thank you, Andrew and Bailey. Really appreciate the invitation. And as a person born in Mississippi, always happy to be spending some time with folks in the twin state of Mississippi over there in
Yeah.
Alabama.
Yeah.
So thrilled to be with you all. A little bit about myself before we get too far into the weeds. I joined NACAC in May of 2023, so right before SFFA. And that was immediately after spending 2 years in the Biden-Harris administration, where I was the chief of staff and the policy advisor at the Department of Education. And then before that, I worked in the civil rights space as the leader of the Higher Education Civil Rights Coalition. And then prior to that, I was a school advisor. I was a college advisor. So worked with students in both rural North Carolina and Nashville, Tennessee. So really understand intimately what you all are going through. We talk about FAFSA and the like. I definitely remember being in the throes of that. So as we talk about policy updates and advocacy in general, one thing that I think is so important for all of our members to know is that we are the experts. Our policymakers look to us to help provide them with good ideas and opinions on their policies, and that's because they know that we are the folks who know the ins and outs of how these things actualize once they hit the ground or when the rubber meets the road and these policies are implemented. So in any conversation that you have with a policymaker, feel free to go ahead and feel confident in your knowledge and your expertise, because you know what it's like to advise your 500 students, or you know what it's like to read the applications of thousands of students. So like we are the experts here. And so we are here really to help guide our policymakers to making the best policy decisions for both our students and our profession and field moving forward. Because it is really important. The work that we do in education is nation building work. And so it has to be viewed as such and prioritized as such. And so that's one thing that I hope that you all take with you as you go into your conversations with your state policymakers or even local policymakers. Where NACAC tends to lead in terms of our policy advocacy is on student and equity-centered admissions practices, professional responsibility and ethics for college admission counseling professionals, and the expansion of capacity and impact of school counselors and college advisors. What that means for that student equity-centered admission is emphasizing the needs of systemically underserved students. When higher education was started in America before it was actually America in 1630 something, so many people were not actually included in the student body, right? Education was meant to just train preachers and some educators, but so many folks were not included. So we have to make sure that as we continue to use this higher education apparatus that we have in this country, that we do emphasize the needs of those who have never been central or centered in these conversations. Because as they say, a rising tide lifts all ships. And so if you are making sure that you are serving the students who need the most support, maybe they're your rural students, maybe they're urban students, other students are going to do better because of the services provided. Other students will be able to take advantage of it, and that will be better for all people. And we'll have classrooms that are diverse and prepare students for the world that they're going into. We also think about expanding NACAC's policy, quote unquote, playing field. So while admissions is incredibly important, and that is NACAC's primary focus when it comes to advocacy, one of the things that we like to think about is how can we ensure universities have the support that they need to serve the students that deserve to be supported and served. And so thinking about ways to ensure that we lend our voice to things like a bill that supports basic needs for colleges and universities, so that colleges and universities can distribute basic needs grants to their students to make sure that no one is hungry or that they can get housing. Um, we also think about ways to support those systemically underserved students in unique ways. So thinking about supporting grants like C Campus, for instance, on the federal level, which is child care access meets parents in schools. That provides colleges and universities with grants to support either an on campus daycare or provide vouchers to local child care facilities so that students who are parents can make sure that they have a safe place for their child to be and learn and grow while they continue their educational pathways. And so making sure that we always lean into anything that expands access for folks is something that we're going to do. And so sometimes that means getting a little creative in some of the policies that we endorse or in some of the policy proposals that we suggest. And then we also want to build NACAC into the resource for the outside world of a clearinghouse for equity-centered practices. So one of the ways that we do this is by the conference proposals that everyone submits and the presentations that they put on. We like to try to gather as much of that as we can so that we have it in our back pocket. So if anyone comes to us and says, hey, is there an idea about what to do with artificial intelligence in higher education or education, we can go and look through the folks who present to us or who have submitted presentations and say, actually, we have some people who might be great experts on this. Let me go ahead and check with them and see what they have to say. Um, so we love to be a resource for both state and federal level on those equity centered practices so we can, again, help make sure that we're giving good advice and good counsel to people who want to do right by students and by our field. When we think about ethics in college admission counseling, I think one of the first things that probably comes to many members' minds is the guide to ethical practice in college admission, which NACAC puts out annually. And that's really important. It's important for the field so that we know that we have a guide to make sure that it lays out some of the guardrails and some of the things to avoid so that you can serve the best interest of the students and take care of yourself in that process. And then it's also really important for the policymakers and for the public to see that we do actually have guidelines. It's kind of like the realtor, real estate agent situation. It's like we actually have guidelines, we have ethics that we follow, that we encourage our members to follow, so that people feel confident in coming to us, our members, for their expertise on college access and advising on admissions counseling, but also so that they know that whenever we do suggest policy proposals, it's coming from an ethical and centered place. That gives a lot of confidence to our policymakers that when we make suggestions, it isn't just to be advantageous or anything like that, but is actually to make sure that we are caring on behalf of our students. Um, and it helps us to advocate the public policies that emphasize ethics in college transitions. So when we think about some of the regs that the Department of Education has implemented, so thinking about things like incentive compensation, for instance, and the ban on that, that's really important. And so this actually gives us a blueprint for some policies that we could lift up and see either in the regulatory space, so run by an agency, or the legislative space, and voted on by Congress. And so that's one of those other reasons that ethics is really important for us. And then when we talk about support for student school counselors and college advising, it's really important to us that we help reduce the student to counselor ratio. I think Alabama is at 409 to 1 right now, which is a lot. That's a lot of students on one counselor's caseload, especially considering all the work that counselors do, right? It's not just college advising and post secondary transition planning. It's ensuring that your students are taken care of as a whole person, making sure that they're fed, making sure that they have their classes, making sure many of our counselors are also testing coordinators. They wear so many hats. So we need to keep working on reducing that counselor student to counselor ratio. We also like to provide best practice information in state and local settings, which comes oftentimes from you all at the state and regional level. You know how to best support your students. All states are not the same, and all areas within states are not the same. So Montgomery looks very different from Selma, which looks very different from Hoover. And so it's really important that you all share those best practices so that they can be adapted and implemented uh, in a way that serves your students best. Um, we also like to make sure that practitioners are trained, right? And so we will oftentimes lean in on legislation that encourages either grant funding to counselor education programs so that people can get the trainings, or looking at alternative ways to support school or college advising. So thinking about lifting up our CBOs and the work that they do that's so important and so profound that provides a little bit of relief to school counselors who are lucky enough to have those partnerships formed. When we think about some of the things that NACAC supports, one of the big topics is college affordability. I think that is really important and on the top of mind for so many people. Student protections against fraud and abuse. I think that kind of goes back to the income compensation, instead of compensation band that I was talking about, those sorts of policies that incentivize preying on students, but don't incentivize like ensuring students are served well, are those policies that we are going to be opposing wholeheartedly because students should not be seen as money bags. They should be seen as people, right? And so we want to make sure our institutions are serving those students well. And so we want to get the bad actors out the paint so that we can narrow the field, narrow their aperture on institutions that do serve them well. Thinking about pathways to citizenship and ensuring that our schools can serve students who may have been brought here through no fault of their own, but are endowed with the right to an education here in this country. And so, what does that mean if we tell them, hey, you do everything right, you serve, you hold up your end of the bargain, you get good grades, do what you can, but you actually can't go to one of our schools. Your parents pay taxes, you pay taxes, you contribute to our society, but you don't have an affordable means to access the public college in your state. That's a problem because these are students who are in our communities. And quite frankly, we are limiting our potential as a nation when we do that because talent is evenly distributed, but opportunity is not. And so we have to make sure that we continue to encourage those who want to pursue higher education, meaningful pathways to do that. We also care a lot about global student mobility. So ensuring that students from abroad can come and join our campus communities here is going to be really important to us. So that sometimes means that we liaise with the State Department and Homeland Security to ensure that there aren't any prohibitive hurdles, unnecessarily prohibitive hurdles to students from abroad from enrolling or returning to campus here. Sometimes students will go home from the summer, things change, and they have a hard time getting back. And we want to make sure that we can mitigate those adverse possibilities as much as possible. And then thinking about transfer pathways. I know that 2025 is allegedly a big year in higher education in the college admissions world. The demographic cliff, as everyone has called it, transfer pathways is a way to help mitigate some of that the damage from people just having fewer children, right? There are so many adults who have some college but no degree. How can we ease their pathway back to higher education? And so that's something that we push for a lot on the federal level. There are some states that do a really good job of it that could be models for others, but ensuring those articulation agreements are clear and easy for students to follow are things that are really important to us. some of the top issues that we are focusing on right now, in addition to those things that we generally support, this is the first cycle post Students for Fair Admissions. And so we are merely watching to see kind of how the data shakes out. We were encouraged when we saw that more students were applying to schools and that the numbers seem to be kind of rebounding from the pandemic, which is great. Uh, but we don't know how the composition of those classes will shape up. And so we are watching with bated breath to see that data about students who are from um, communities of color, how their transition to higher education or their matriculation is. We are also really focused on equity, which is under attack in many states across the country, and ensuring that students receive what they need when they need it and how they need it. That is the most important thing to us. If you do not care about serving students well, that means you don't care about equity. And so it's really important to us that we frame the conversation in that way. Equity means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But for us, it means ensuring students have what they have or what they need when they need it and how they need it. So thinking about students with disabilities, for instance, and making sure that we advocate for policies that help ease their transition to post-secondary. So thinking about things that limit the necessity for them to get retested right before school starts, which can be really costly and may not actually happen until well into the semester, which means they don't have their accommodations. That's not good. And so if we can allow for college and universities to just accept any of their documentation they already have from their K-12 life, because students don't lose the learning disability, that they're not cured of it, they just like learn to learn with it. So if students are able to take that documentation that they had in K-12 over to the college for an easy transition, that's really exciting. And so we are working with Senator Casey on the bill like that right now. FAFSA is obviously something that we are very plugged into trying to get solutions for. I am on a call at least 3 times a week with the Department of Education. I thought when I left the Department of Education, I would only be talking to them, for funsies. I was not super excited when we had to have late Friday night calls about this FAFSA and everything that came along with it. And so what we're focused on is trying to make sure that our members have information that can be helpful. So we have the FAFSA resource page, and that we lift up the voices of our members and share the stories of our members to the department so that they understand the implications of what's happening. I will say about that is that they never had the support needed on the front end in terms of funding to implement that big of a FAFSA change. And so that was something that I think was a big shock, because when I shared that here at NACAC internally, I was like, oh, were we involved in the appropriations process for the budget? And everyone's like, oh, no, we don't know appropriations. And I was like, oh, yeah, you have to pay for things. Like, can't just say things and not pay for them. And so appropriations is one of the things that hindered this FAFSA process. And so that's something that we are really focused on making sure doesn't happen again with any other processes that impact our field. And so we have been having lots more conversations with the Labor H Committee, which is the committee that does appropriations for education things, to make sure that they understand how important it is that when you tell someone that they have to implement a humongous transition and they say that they need a certain amount of money, that you kind of give them, or give them something close to it so they can make it work. But that isn't necessarily what happened this year. What you'll also know is that advocacy takes a village. And so NACAC is a part of many coalitions that highlight some of the things that are really important to us and our members. For instance, we are part of the Committee for Education Funding, which is one of the coalitions that advocates to the appropriations committees regarding education funding on the secondary and post-secondary side. We are in the Project Thrive Coalition, which is a national campaign to support LGBTQ plus youth and their educational journeys. And so we've been working with them on a new guide about supporting LGBTQ plus youth through the college selection process, which we're really excited about. That's going to be coming in the next month or so. We also work with the Protect Students and Taxpayers Coalition, which is the coalition that ensures that predatory institutions don't waste taxpayer money by defrauding students, which is a many people's full-time jobs, but it does take attention and focus to make sure that policies don't leave that back door open for those kinds of institutions. As it relates to staying up to date, I hope you all follow NACAC Wonk on Twitter or X, however you choose to acknowledge it. I'm too old to make the transition to X personally. We also have our bulletin that comes out every 2 weeks and our journal that comes out quarterly. I wrote an article about federalism for this journal just so that we could really understand why it's so important for state advocacy to be strong, and local advocacy, because so many important policies come from the state and local level. A lot of times, federal policies, especially with the way that Congresses have been the last few Congresses, rarely happen or barely happen by the skin of their teeth. But so many more policies are able to happen, as we're seeing, for good or for ill, on the state level. And so I think that's one of the reasons that was my main driver to say, hey, y'all, great questions on the federal level. We are doing what we can. Congress doesn't really work right now, but you all have very efficient legislators that maybe could be really helpful to get some information in front of. And so we also have a website that has our statements of policy, which can be helpful to you all as you advocate and develop your own resources. And you can always reach me at my email address, as Andrew did, and I will. And Andrew can share it out, but it's just the same as everyone else who works at NACAC, cpowell@nacacnet.org. And so if you have any questions or ideas, feel free to always reach out to me. My inbox is always open. And that will wrap up my presentation. And so if there are questions, I'm happy to take any questions. Oh, thanks, Andrew.
Yeah. Actually, so CJ, you mentioned something quite a bit in regards to equity and kind of how that's working within our field right now, and kind of the legislation that's hovering around a lot of DEI offices in colleges, as well as just any kind of public institution. So I'm curious, what advice? The reason I asked this, we actually have a Senate Bill 129 that's currently in legislation, or currently in discussion and approvals, to prohibit the existence, or I guess I should say management of a DEI office for any public institution, whether it be, secondary, primary, any kind of state arm government. So I'm curious, just how does one communicate the value of those offices to legislators? And have you seen any statewide examples of or rather advocacy for those offices that has worked to prevent maybe some legislation passing that would ban a DEI practice on a state organization level?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think to answer your second question, unfortunately, the states that maybe Illinois, I think, has tried to enshrine some DEI work in offices, but and I think that's mostly just a message to other states that have been trying to go against it, to say there are other options here. I think one of the things that may be most helpful is to talk about the impacts of those offices on students staying in, right? I think you can use the notion of a school like the public flagships. I went to the University of North Carolina. In North Carolina, it was not integrated until like 1960 something. Like, our first Black students are still alive. And I think talking about, one, the fact that these institutions are still newly integrated and newly becoming places to serve all people of the state is something that could be helpful. I think also talking about the cost associated with students stopping out of school can be important, because for so many schools, it is more costly for a student to stop out than for a student to finish. And if your DEI offices are providing resources and services and support to students to help them get through school and to get across that finish line so that they can then go into the world with their credential and be able to be a force for public good, a force in the industry, that is going to be really helpful. And then the third one, I think, is really articulating the why not around DEI. So what is your reason as to why not? I think that sometimes will yield interesting responses, and I've not heard anything consistent. I think sometimes people say, try to use the quote from like Ronald Reagan is like, taxpayer money should be using or should be funding intellectual curiosity. Uh, and I think oftentimes that is like the wrong take and approach, because if it's not funding intellectual curiosity, where do we get developments from? Right?
Yeah.
Like, how do we then move further and continue to be a globally competitive nation? How does Alabama continue to be or grow into a competitive state that corporations and businesses still want to bring their offices to? Corporations and businesses have DEI offices. So if they're coming and interviewing students who've never encountered a DEI office, that may cause some concern. That may cause some questions like, ooh, maybe the workforce here isn't one that we want to draw from. And so, like, there are many different points of pressure you could use. The economy being one that generally works. I think also practical notions of like, how does DEI manifest on campus? I think there's a boogeyman. DEI has become something like woke, has become just a boogeyman that is a catch-all for things.
Yeah.
But what does it mean for the students that you're not intending to implicate? What does it mean for students with disabilities?
Yeah.
What does it mean for students who are from rural communities or students who are from urban communities? Like, diversity means diversity. Equity means equity, and inclusion means bringing them all together and making sure that people can feel safe and seen and heard. And so articulating that to them so it is not just the boogeyman catch-all notion, that it is quote unquote CRT, even though it's not. Sorry for that long.
No, no, no. I really appreciate it. I think that was very helpful. And a lot of it is just like, I think common sense of why not? I think I really liked that answer just because, as you say, it's kind of like a human element, of just existence to have, differences between people. And so having some sort of arm of an institution to be able to advocate for, people of all different kind of creeds, backgrounds, what have you, is incredibly important. So I personally, just going to show my cards here for a little bit. I personally don't really appreciate that we have this under discussion right now, but at the same time too, I appreciate the ammo you've just given us to, advocate for our schools and our many of our colleagues who are in that work.
And from a NACAC perspective, I can say NACAC would oppose such a bill
Yes.
from our
Yeah.
advocacy.
Yeah, question. I think I don't know if we have any questions in the Q&A chat. If any of y'all do have any questions who are online, feel free to throw that into the Q&A chat. I did just have one more question, kind of focusing on the FAFSA, CJ. So you mentioned appropriations being like one of those kind of blind spots for uh, the FAFSA advocacy and everything, and that's one of the key reasons why everything's been a little bit slower this year as well too. Have y'all been involved, and are you at liberty to talk about any work you're doing for any future bills that has benefited from that new focus on appropriations?
Um, well, right now, appropriations is trying to avoid a shutdown, and so what we're trying to do, what we're trying to do is ensure that as much education funding that can be
Yeah.
protected is protected. Because I know that the Speaker of the House has come out with like some top line numbers that then the committees have to try to force some things in under,
Sure.
which are going to mean some tough decisions for the chair of that committee. But the ranking member is like, I'm not subscribing to this at all. I think we should not buy these numbers. And so we've been working much more with like the ranking members on those pieces,
Okay.
so that we can have an alternative to some of the kind of austere looking cuts that could be coming to education.
Gotcha. Sounds good. My final question to you is just as far as NACAC as a whole is concerned, are there any blind spots that really need more representation from secondary as opposed to higher ed professionals and vice versa, that you feel could fill in some of those gaps as we try to get more people to volunteer and be part of what goes on in SACAC and NACAC?
That's a really great question. I think that something that I've learned since being at NACAC is whenever
Yeah.
there's like a moment where like one person on one side of the desk is feeling like a little squirmy about maybe advocating for something, it's probably the right time for the person from the opposite side of the desk to carry that water. They are
Yeah.
likely more able to really take that on. I think that lots of things that implicate our schools could be advocated on just by folks on the higher ed side, either from their official post in higher ed or as a person. So I think a lot about like the way that curriculum is being eroded or watered down a lot in states. I think if I'm a college admissions person and I'm like, whoa, you're telling students what about people who were enslaved? That like it was fun for them and they got a skill. That
Sure.
that's not a college level learning of what enslavement was, what our time of enslavement was. And so,
Yeah.
like, I think there are some ways that we could be creative in using that and saying, like, ooh, we know that that's the curriculum. We know that we're going to do a lot of remediation, which is going to cost more money to taxpayers, or we're going to have to like say maybe not this student. This student might not be right for our campus, and that's not a position you all want to be put in. And I think for you all, I think if I'm a high school counselor or a college advisor, and I know that there's a DEI bill that's trying to get rid of funding or trying to prohibit institutions from using their own funds to support DEI, I'm going to say, I'm not sending my student to that school. Like point blank, period. When
Sure.
I worked with students in rural North Carolina, I was like, all right, like you're going to Charlotte. You're going to Charlotte. It's the big city. Are you ready for that? Like you have to have these conversations that fit and match. And one of the conversations that come along with that are you being supported as a whole person by that institution? And so for those students that weren't, I would say maybe that's not the school for you. And so that was where I raised a lot of my voice as a school counselor or as a college advisor
Yeah.
was during those times because I remember I had a student parent and there was a school that like was like, oh, we you can't come here or we don't have childcare, we don't have any way to fund help you find childcare. So I was like, well, it sounds like this institution that has it on campus and has your spot ready to go is the right place for you. So it's just like those conversations is just something that I think a lot of people assume people don't care about, but I would argue that many people do.
Absolutely. Okay. Any questions for you, statements? All right, cool. And I think our Q&A is clear. So CJ, I want to thank you so much for your time with us today. And thank you so much for giving us the updates and obviously answering my questions here. And as I mentioned, I did, or rather, as CJ mentioned, I put his email in the chat. So y'all feel free to reach out if you have any other questions. And of course, all of our NACAC friends, staff are, you can find them on the website at nacatnet.org. So CJ, thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me and have a great day.
Thank you so much. So we're going to go ahead and move on through our agenda here. Before we get into SACAC updates, do you think we should just move on to the legislative side and end with SACAC updates since Kelly's going to join us? So we had a little bit of a change last minute. We didn't realize that Kelly Kavich, who was supposed to be joining us, actually has a meeting scheduled. So that was my bad, to be frank. I'm going to go ahead and own that one. So she typically will give us SACAC updates since she's part of the SACAC board. She did let me know there aren't too many updates. And so since we have a little bit of time between now and our next speaker from Alabama Possible, I wanted to go ahead and just kind of lean into our updates regarding legislation in the state of Alabama. And so we are going to, I sent out a, I sent out the, to all of our people who are attending today, a link to this document. If you're not able to find it, just let me know, shoot me back an email and I'll be able to send it to you. This is something that we drafted up just as a quick, very quick reference to some of the bills that have been proposed this session. And these are currently in committee. These are currently, just in talks. They're not necessarily passed laws just yet, just Senate bill proposals and House bill proposals. I tried to go through this as much as possible and just weed out the ones that related directly to our membership. But it's not a comprehensive list, like I mentioned before. So not all of this is going to, like actually follow up with every little bit of legislation that's out there. So if I have any missed things there, I do feel free to throw things out there in the Q&A as well too. Or if you have any questions, let us know as well. But just kind of a quick high-level overview. First of all, in case you are ever curious as to what's happening in the state of Alabama, there is a link on this form that takes you directly to the current bills that are in session and gives you, where they're being applied to, as well as who the sponsor is, what the bill number is, when it was proposed, which obviously all these are going to be in the 2024 session, and then of course the actual text of the bill as well too. And so I just have this page linked in there as well too for a quick update. You can also filter through. So current section, you can search by different texts, search by all sessions if you want to look at past bills. If you have a login too, you also can save bills so that way you can just reference them later. So it's Alabama government working for you to make things a little bit easier to reference. And so I'll definitely be able to send that out to you guys after today as well. But like I said, I wanted to go ahead and just kind of cover this real quick. And so I try to break this down in kind of a general, non-student related, but related to the education field, as well as K through 12, kind of all encompassing that kind of fits primary as well as secondary education, secondary specific, and then also post-secondary institutions. Now, with the K-12, I may have gotten a little bit crazy, included things that could have just affected all levels of education. I tried to keep things as neat as possible, but also, not as hard to follow as 500 different bullet points might be. So just a quick little overview of everything. Currently, there are a couple things in process. I thought one of the more interesting ones, just not super controversial or anything like that, just an interesting update in the world of education in the state of Alabama. There are currently a couple of different magnet programs in the state, which Cybertech up in the Huntsville area, ASFA in Birmingham, and of course ASMS down in Mobile. And now there's a proposed medical scholarship. I'm sorry, a proposed. And I just realized now I just read the first couple of sentences here, so I'm not talking about this, but a proposed bill that would establish a new school for students in health sciences. And so where's that bill? Oh, yeah, sorry. I was just looking one down. So House Bill 163, the Alabama School of Healthcare Sciences, school similar, like I said, and structure all those. Basically, this is kind of just the guiding tool for what the act actually lays out the aims, general expected curriculum, and board structure of the school. Very similar to those that I mentioned as well earlier. This would be located in the Demopolis area around Marengo County. It'd be open to all students in Alabama. It'd be a red school as well too, very similar again to all those other schools that I mentioned. And it could potentially beginning enrollment in fall 2026. This is partly being established as obviously just a need for healthcare professionals is, needed in the state of Alabama and nationally speaking as well too. So I think this is a really good inroad to providing those opportunities for students to get into those health-related careers. You also have on the same note too, Senate Bill 100 going back up to the top of the list, the Board for Medical Scholarships Award. Now this actually affects professional level students. So in many cases, this would not necessarily affect any of our staff immediately. In most cases, just understand SACAC membership as it stands right now, but is definitely a good option for students in our state who might be going on to these professional schools when it comes to dentistry, medicine, OT, optometry, or the list goes on. Obviously, as UAB people here, that affects a good number of our students. And so that's something that we were very excited to see. But a lot of stuff is very much still in question as far as any kind of requirements for those haven't really been laid out. This would just be creating a board and rather a fund for this. And so it would definitely be a long-term planning process before these scholarships could be made available to students. But it is something that is, once again, kind of addressing that healthcare need in the state of Alabama and nationally speaking as well too. One of the things that we talked about as well too, Senate Bill 129, we kind of already talked about this with CJ, but this is one of the big ones that's been in the news a lot recently, especially if you're in higher education, just because these are often very common offices. But this would basically prohibit certain public entities, including state agencies, local boards of education, and public higher ed institutions from maintaining diversity, equity, inclusion offices or departments. And this bill also prohibits sponsorship of any DEI program that advocates for a divisive concept. That divisive concept language is very common in a lot of these state level as well as national level legislation proposals. This is not a, as CJ mentioned too, this is not an uncommon thing. These anti-DEI bills are often very much cut from the same cloth when they're ever proposed in state level senates or state level houses. This is obviously not something many, I would say most of our members would be comfortable with. This is definitely not something NACAC would be happy with or supportive of, and I could say the same thing for SACAC as well too. This is definitely one of those things that is a great boon to many of our universities, especially since these programs have a lot of different offshoots, whether it be multicultural organizations, specific ambassadors, specific peer mentoring groups that focus on diverse populations, provide equity and a lot of inclusivity programming as well too. And so this is one of those that I would really, if you have not already, consider contacting your state representative on the Senate and House level if you are so opposed to this position, to let them know that you oppose this position as a member of SACAC and as a higher education, secondary education professional. Moving on, just because I do want to keep us on time here, and we got about 8 more minutes until we have another speaker here. But House Bill 130, we have very similar type of law here as well too, on restriction of talking about gender identity, sexual orientation from existing law of K-5 to K-12 in public schools. So basically extending that to high school level students and middle school level students. Once again, this is also one of those divisive things that's been in the news a little bit as well too. This also relates to a lot of the proposals for the Alabama Library Board and about certain divisive concepts that are portrayed in certain books as well too, and banned books and all that good jazz, or all that jazz, I guess I should say. So this is one of those other things that is kind of within that same realm. And then moving down here, we also have a couple of things that have also been in the news for about a year now, that are just now getting to legislation. And I say about a year, it feels like a year. But Senate Bill 61 is one of those. So this is basically kind of the school choice program that's already been, there's been a lot of back and forth on this one. As far as just reporting as well as discussion on how this benefits students, how it may not benefit school systems or students as a whole. And so just as a quick reminder of what this is establishment of the Education Savings Accounts or ESAs, participating students expenses. So this bill would establish various program requirements, including provisions to prevent fraud and other misuse of program funds. The money would cover as much as $7,000 in educational expenses for families who don't want to send students to their local zone public school. And this could be applicable towards private education as well as other public institutions that a student may be able to attend, just not in their zone as well. These ESAs would be available as early as next year. And so that is something that is currently happening. We also have the bill to establish the lottery. Would you play lottery? Would you play a lottery if we
No, I really don't.
I personally have only ever played the lottery once in Florida, and it was just, I didn't win, obviously, but this has been something that's been under consideration a lot over the past, I don't know, my entire existence as a human being. So the past 30 years or so here. But this is basically just the bill to establish an Alabama lottery to fund education and general fund program. So in case you've seen this in the headlines, you haven't really read too much about it, something I learned in this whole thing, this is actually a proposal for a lottery that will only last for a period of 10 years. And so if approved, it would have a 10-year life cycle, at which point it would start to be retired in its 10th year. So basically all of its board and functioning parts would be slowly cycled out as of that 10th year as well too. So that's something interesting. Just in case I'm not really going to harp too much on this, just that's one of those things out there that's a possible funding source for education that's been supported. And it's also just one of those hot topics in the state of Alabama and has been for a very long time. So we have a couple other things kind of dealing. I wasn't going to spend too much time on this just because I know right now, currently in the webinar, we have mostly people from the other side of the desk, the higher education side of the desk, but a lot of things happening within the realm of K-12. You have certain bills that would provide uniform statewide process for terms and requirements regarding student suspension expulsion. You also have a couple of things when it comes to transparency on school curricula, specifically for parents to be able to review as well as maybe submit complaints regarding any kind of criteria that they might find unsuitable for children based on level, based on content. As well too. HB 169 is one of those that would require a school or school system to post classroom curricular syllabi on their websites or the website of the system itself or on the Alabama school, or rather Alabama Department of Education website for parents and guardians to be able to see as well. So a lot going on in that regard too. This would basically set up a complaint system that kind of has a tree of going from teacher to if need to be elevated to the administration of that school, to the administration of the school board, to the administration of the state as a whole as well too. This obviously has some benefits, some I would say detriments for both sides that would be immediately affected in this: parents, teachers, students. But at the end of the day, this is one of those things that has been kind of part of that whole conversation of those divisive concepts that we hear so much about. Then you also have HB 59, school boards and governing bodies for charter schools, being able to have chaplains in those schools and solicit services of those chaplains, whether it be through volunteer or through hire as well. Like I mentioned, I'm not really going to spend too much more time on this because we've only got about 2 more minutes. But a lot of these things are having to do with school security, which is a big issue, obviously, just with our current climate. Nationally speaking, school security has definitely been a major focus, as well as just some changes to curricula or availability of curricula for parents as well as the public to see for different students as well, too. And then finally, just the non-student related thing that I want to highlight too, that's also been kind of a topic of discussion in the news as well, has been HB 146, that 2% salary increase for the Department of Ed employees. That would include teachers and staff for K-12 institutions, the Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind, Child Services, and also one thing I also learned here, just outside of just reading the news reports and headlines and everything, that also include our friends over in the community college side of things too, which would be great win for basically everybody involved. So that's why this is just in that special category all unto itself. So that's, like I said, that's a quick list of some things that affect our world and education in the state of Alabama. However, it's not fully comprehensive. Try to be as comprehensive as possible, but we're only 2 people. We have full-time jobs. And we obviously, like I said, do have a list to this link as well too. Some things have also been updated since we last updated this as well too. So apologies if there was anything we mentioned that maybe we've received updates on it since we first started this webinar this morning. But just wanted to kind of keep you guys in the loop as well too on some of those things that are happening in our world. Now, I am going to bring Chandra Scott in. I realize, sorry, you've been hanging out in the webinar side of things. I don't need to bring you in as a panelist here, so I apologize about that. And so Ms. Scott is joining us from Alabama Possible. Ms. Scott, how are you doing today?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me virtually. I am so sorry my voice is awful, and so please forgive me for that, but this flu has been something bad this year.
Oh gosh, the flu. Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I apologize that you're going through that.
No worries. Until I can't, for some reason, I can't turn my video on, but as long as you can hear me, then that's great. If I can share
Yes,
my
ma'am.
screen, I'll be glad to go through the day. But again, thank you all so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I'm going to make sure, let's see. All right. So I've given you co-host privileges, so you should be able to share your screen at this point.
Awesome.
Yes. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. Well, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for inviting me to your Advocacy Day. I'm Chandra Scott, the Executive Director of Alabama Possible. If you don't know who Alabama Possible is, I'm just going to give a quick overview about the organization. Last year we turned 30 years old, which was very exciting to be in the seat of the Executive Director and to be able to celebrate 30 years that this organization has done so much work and that's been so impactful across our state. And even since 30 years ago, the mission has not changed. It has always been centered around breaking down barriers to prosperity through advocacy, education, and collaboration. And what's exciting to see is just how that work continues to expand. This organization originally probably was more focused on civic engagement and post-secondary access. And that work has now expanded to include not just access, but also post-secondary success in really deepening our role in advocacy in this space. So you may be familiar with some of the logos or images that you see on this screen. That's part of our work and some of our branding efforts. But I'm going to go through each one of these very briefly just to give you a taste of some of the work that Alabama Possible leads or facilitates or a co-partner in. And then I want to go into later on some of the advocacy in which we're working on currently that impacts post-secondary workspace. And I saw one that you just mentioned about one of the Senate bills 129, which we have partnered with Alabama Forward around because we want to protect our college advisors. So we'll talk about some of that at the end, but I want to start with civic engagement. That is really the cornerstone in which how this organization was founded. Our founders 30 years ago really was really interested in understanding the plight of those who that lived in poverty. And the one way to do that was to get the voice of the people and just not make assumptions off of data. And so they went into the communities to really hear from them. And so over those years of really just going out into communities and hearing the voice of the people and the challenges that they face of overcoming poverty, at that time the organization was called the Alabama Poverty Project. And hearing the voice of the people made the individuals realize we should not be calling the organization the Alabama Poverty Project. And so it became Alabama Possible. And so because we wanted to emphasize what is possible and not keep emphasizing poverty. So it was about changing the narrative and changing the mindset across our state about what poverty looks like in our state. And so there's a few tools that we provide as an organization to help kind of combat that narrative. One is a data sheet that we provide every year. I hope everyone on this is listening has access to it or have utilized it. If not, it is always on our website. But this data sheet we produce every year gives you a glimpse or really a nice balcony purview of what's playing out across all 67 counties in our state. So it's done by county. So you can see the post-secondary attainment rate, employment rate, childhood poverty rate, all those things that if you're a grant writer on here, these are data points that you would need. If you're into looking into policy, these are data points you'll need. So this data sheet has been very informative for not only just community leaders, but also elected officials in state and out of state. I currently have recently learned that a lot of out-of-state funders utilize this data sheet to decide which counties in our state that they want to support with funding. So it's very, very informative. It really gives you a nice snapshot of what's happening. But again, you can't just go by data. You also have to have the voice of the people. And we do that through our Break It Down discussion series. So this is a series in which we go into the counties. It was been done virtually because when we first started, it was in the middle of COVID. And so we learned that, okay, people are restless, they're feeling lonely. Let's still engage people. And so we created the Break It Down discussion series, and people would log on to a Zoom Brady Bunch room, and we would just have conversations based on the data sheet. We didn't go in with any agenda. We let them guide the conversation. But what we learned, I have to say haphazardly, was that the Zoom method was probably the more safe space for individuals. They shared with us that usually these type of conversations will happen at their chambers, city offices, and they didn't feel welcomed enough to go. And so, but having it on a Zoom space, they were in their homes, they were in their safe space. And so they were willing to come on and share their thoughts. And these are the people we need to hear from the most, because they are the ones that's being impacted by these data points, or live out these data points. And so it was really eye-opening for our organization. And so we continue those discussions virtually today. Even though we can have them in person, but we found when we switch to in person, we lose the very people that we want to be engaged in those conversations. And so for those who do like to have in-person engagement, we have brought back our poverty simulation experiences. This is when we are able to really put people in the shoes, more to say, and to walk the walk of an individual who's challenged by the various barriers that people who are living in poverty go through every day. So you are given an identity, and you have to live out that identity throughout this time period in its poverty simulation experience. And I have to say, I recently had to facilitate the Leadership Alabama class of, I think it's 33, and we did it in Montgomery. This is their photos here. And I have to say, this was a first. I have never experienced a poverty simulation where there were people literally being robbed. And so that just shows you, I mean, we laughed about it a little bit in the room, but during our debriefing, and these were very well-respected people who were putting on this type of behavior. But when they realized their backs were against the wall, their families want to have no food, they just saw an opportunity to steal. And so they did, to make sure their families were fed. And I have to say, one of the most moving comments that we heard from, I won't name the individual, but they're very well known across our state, is that they're going to watch the news a lot differently. Because they always make these judgments when they watch the news and see people being mostly Black and brown people who were going to jail for robbing or stealing. And he said, now, not to excuse them all, but he said, but now he can understand when your back is against the wall and you have children to feed, or you have an elderly parent you're trying to take care of, and everything seems to be going wrong, you become desperate and you do desperate things, but that doesn't mean you are a bad person. And so it was really the poverty simulation experience is just that. It gives you an experience to really change mindsets and to change the narrative and how we talk about and how we address poverty in and across our state. And so if any of you are ever interested in hosting a poverty simulation, we are glad to help support your organization to go through that experience. Actually, we have one going on today. And so it's really exciting when we see organizations reach out to us and wanting to understand the challenges and how policy really impacts individuals that are in poverty, and how things that are established for one group of people really, really comes down hard on another group of people. And so we have to make sure we have those clear paths of understanding, and how do we make those changes? But again, it starts with educating and understanding what poverty looks and feels like, and changing that narrative. And so another body of work, which Alabama Possible is very well known for, is its post-secondary access work, my Alabama Goes to College campaign. So this campaign has three components, as you see listed here, the Cash for College, the Alabama College Application Week, and our College and Career Decision Day. So a lot of this work is centered around the completion of the FAFSA. And I know now, saying the word FAFSA, you have to duck and dodge, because no one wants to hear that word, because it's been so chaotic this year. But I do want to share some of the good highlights of the FAFSA, in spite of the challenges that we're having with it now. But this campaign has been very instrumental across our state in getting more students aware of their opportunities, especially those students who usually just can't even afford to have the conversation about a post-secondary pathway at all. And so with the Cash for College, we really emphasize on completing the FAFSA, just to help you open that conversation And then the Alabama College Application Week, we now do it twice a year in partnership with the State Department of Education. We do it in the fall and in the spring. We just did it last week, where we have colleges in and out of state who will waive their application admissions process fee. And so students can apply to as many colleges on that list as possible to really open that door even wider for them to have the opportunity. Because let's be honest, if we are the sixth poorest state in the nation, that's a lot of students across our state, a lot of families who cannot afford a $35 to $50 admissions cost. That's usually the gas for the week to get to and from work. It could be a prescription. Those things cannot be put aside for one application that you don't know is a guarantee. And so a lot of times families just don't even have those conversations. And so this is a way to removing that barrier. And then, of course, it's the College and Career Decision Day. You know, Alabama is a huge football state. So we have decision days all over the state when people sign for baseball, basketball, and football. But we have to celebrate those students who are also going on pathways that are not athletes. And so we always make sure that we partner with our high school counselors across the state, and even our a lot of our community colleges have done such a tremendous job in partnering with us and celebrating these students who sign on. And that's another thing, this is about redefining what college is any pathway after high school. And so we want to celebrate those students, whether it's a 2-year, 4-year military. We want to make sure we elevate them and make them feel just as special as that college athlete who gets their decision day. And so, of course, during this campaign, we have various resources that are of no cost to educators or to families. We make sure that we do not charge not one penny to any student who needs these resources. So we have an educator's guidebook as well as for students and families. We recently published what we call Not 13th Grade. So these are for graduating seniors to help them understand there is a disconnect between your senior year and your freshman year in college and how language is going to change. And you would be just as surprised as I was when we did a poll, when we asked students, what do you think it means when you see on your syllabus when you get to college and it says office hours? And you won't believe how many students really thought that meant that's the time you could not bother your professor. And so, because in high school, a lot of times that meant office hours was when the counselor had things to do in the office and you was off limits to students. And so you have to help students understand the change in language and what to look for, and just some tips about what happens, what they need to do in their first year in college. And then, of course, we always want to highlight winning strategies. And so we create case studies off of high school counselors who were our award winners for our Alabama Goes to College campaign. And those are counselors who did a phenomenal job of having high FAFSA completion rates for their students in spite of the barriers that they may face, and also counselors who had a higher year-over-year improvement of FAFSA completion for their students. And of course, with that, we provide educators with toolkits. They don't have the time to create social media posts, to create press releases and all those things. So all of that is already created for them. All they have to do is pull it down from the drive and just put their school logo on it and send it out. And so we want to make sure that we create a space for them that's just really easy and accessible. But also we learned that we needed to hear from them as well about what works and what doesn't work. So we created what we call the Educator Advisory Council, and we go through a selection process where we select a counselor from each workforce region, since our state has 7. That way we make sure every region in our state is represented by a high school counselor. And these counselors meet every month, and they just come together and just share what's working, their challenges, and they're really just a brain trust for us to help us understand what resources we need to provide for counselors to help them be better at what they do every day. And so I'm not sure if you're aware, but 2 years ago, we were able to pass a universal FAFSA policy in our state. I see you nodding your head. And so that really, I have to say, was, believe it or not, that was my first task on the job. I had just become ED of Alabama Possible. And, you know, I don't know about you, but I don't think it's normal to get a call from the governor's office your first week on the job. And so I knew then this was serious. And so she was wanting to really lean on us to support in getting this across the finish line. And we were able to. And I'm very proud the first year we got it across the finish line, we were 9th in the nation for FAFSA completion. And now we're holding at 11th. And so that just really tells you that this has been very intentional work in really supporting families and students in getting the FAFSA completed, which is then opening doors for students to have more choices after high school. And that's what for me, what it was about. This wasn't about checking off a compliance box of making sure something was just done. This is really about giving students more choices. If you have a better education, you have a better path after high school, your choices are increased. You can choose the type of insurance, you can choose where you want to live, you can choose the car you drive. All of those things are choices that are made up based on our income. And so we wanted to make sure that students, had that opportunity to have a post-secondary pathway, but FAFSA we see is the gateway. So we're proud to say that our state is still in the top 20 rankings since the passing of that universal FAFSA. And so now I want to switch over to our post-secondary success work. So here, I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but we have what we call an Alabama College Attainment Network. This network is really, it's a statewide network of very diverse stakeholders from across the state that come together to really look at the bridge between higher ed and workforce. And I have to be honest, when this network was launched in 2020, the year that like 2 weeks before I came on, and I have to be very honest, I was not a fan of the Alabama College Attainment Network. I was on the steering committee, and I was like, guys, the governor already has a post-secondary attainment committee. Why are we duplicating this? So then, of course, I inherit the Alabama College Attainment Network. I'm like, okay, so I inherited the thing that I did not agree with, but we're going to make it work. And let's see what about it can we make it better. And so we began to reshape it where it became more of a community of policy. Like, let's look at policy that impacts higher ed and workforce, and where's the bridge between the two? And so it became more purposeful that way, because the last thing I do not ever want to do is have people leave one meeting and the same group goes to another meeting and the discussions are the same. So our state is small. We use a lot of the same people for brain trust. I want to make sure we're capitalizing on them the right way. And so in doing so, we learned very quickly that the individuals that were part of the Alabama College Attainment Network were our top tier individuals, top tier leaders, but they weren't necessarily the ones that was going to go back and be the doers of the work that we discussed in those meetings. And so now we have launched what we call regional college attainment networks. So each workforce region in our state will now do a deeper dive in partnership with their workforce council that is already established in their region to really identify who's been missing from these conversations. And let's make sure that we have a bigger and a better network to really create what I would call the right ecosystem that's going to bridge people from getting the post-secondary training and into the career, not training in hopes of a career. We have to change that trajectory. There's too much conversation about, is higher ed worth it? Well, it's never going to be worth it if we can't create true pathways for individuals right from trainings from college into a career. It should not be in hopes of, it should be guaranteed. And so that is the work that the Alabama College Attainment Network, in partnership with the Regional College Attainment Network, is doing across our state currently. And so I'm really proud of that work, by how they have really come together. And what I love about it, we are not the ones going in with the agenda. We're just convening them, helping them create their guiding questions about who's missing, what's working well and what's not working well in our region, and how do we need to work to prioritize our energy and our resources to close those gaps. And so I'm excited to say we're in our 4th annual virtual conference that will be hosted on April 10th. Hope you can register and join us. Now, the link is above there. It's on our website. We just got confirmation this year. Our keynote speaker will be Elizabeth Huntley, or Liz Huntley. I don't know if you all are familiar with her, but she's an author, an attorney, but she's a huge advocate of child preschool, but she's such an amazing speaker. And so I was hoping she would say yes, and she gave us her yes. And so this year's theme is Forging Forward. We're a year away from the governor's goal of 500,000 highly credentialed Alabamians by 2025. And so now we really have to put the gas down and really figure out what are the smart decisions to be made to help us get to that goal. And so that I'm hoping you can join us virtually on April 10th from 9 to 2 for our Forging Forward Alabama Can Conference. Another part of our success work is Reengage Alabama. So Reengage Alabama really was birthed out of looking at the data when we were in partnership with the Alabama Commission of Higher Ed and Third Sector. And we were all just looking at data and realized, surprisingly, how many adult learners were enrolled in our four-year institutions across our state. And when we realized it was over 14%, there was no brainer there that we really need to be more intentional about that, because it was happening with or without intentionality, but it would be so much better for adults if they knew they were enrolled in the system that was really for them and really giving attention to them. And so Reengage Alabama was born in August of 2022. And I have to say, we met with all of the four-year public colleges in our state. 9 of them became very engaged in this work. And I have to say that out of that work, what we saw is that a lot of the institutions had practices in place for adult learners, but they were little just watered down or versions of what they did for, true freshmen or incoming students. It really wasn't really created for the adult learner. And so they began to look at themselves through this process over the last year about what does a journey look like for an adult learner on your campus? Does the material speak to them? Or does it just look like, 19, 20-year-olds hanging out on the quad? Well, if I'm a 30-year-old, I am not hanging out on the quad with 20-year-olds. So that does not speak to me. I'm most likely a mother that's going to be probably, because I'm sometimes coming with my child in tow to get something that I need and then going home and doing the work. And so, or I may be in the military, it could be so many varying lifestyles. And so we wanted to make sure the colleges took a look at how does your college speak to adults in your community. And so they began to re-chart a pathway of not only just branding themselves better, but also creating a more streamlined pathway for adults at their colleges. And I have to say, they did an amazing job doing that process and really challenging each other, I have to say, and learning from one another. And what I did love the most in watching that process with those institutions, and the 9 were UAB, Troy, Montevallo, Jacksonville State, Athens, Alabama State, University of West Alabama, University of North Alabama, and USA. They all took the time to learn from one another and not seen as competitors in that process. And that's when students win, when institutions can put aside the competitiveness and really come together and learn from one another and share with one another. And that was really what the Reengage Alabama process was in helping them do better about serving adults across their state. Because remember, they were already enrolling 14% without being intentional. And so now they're looking to increase that enrollment, especially with adults that have some college and no degree. And we'll talk about the policy that's being impacted by that was brought up through this group. And the other thing I want to talk about under post-secondary success before we get into advocacy is our historically Black community colleges and predominantly Black community college network. Now, I'll be the first to admit, I always thought these institutions had their own network. And when I learned they didn't, I was appalled, especially when Alabama has 8 institutions in our state. 6 of them are historically Black, which means we have 50% of the historically Black community colleges in the nation, in our state alone. So that was a huge, huge, to me, slap in the face to our state that these individual institutions have not had a network for themselves. So we have been able to partner with Complete College America, Lumina Foundation, and the Annie E. Casey Foundation, ECMC Foundation, and really created a space where not only Alabama's 8 institutions, but also there's 24 total across the nation that have joined us, and creating a safe space and a network for these institutions to come together, cross-share and cross-learn from one another. Every year we've hosted what we call the Higher Education Alliance Luncheon. And this luncheon brings together 2- and 4-year presidents together to really for us to celebrate them is a lot of times they're not celebrated. It's always pointed out what they can do better. And so we use that time to celebrate them and to bring them together to have conversations about how they can better collaborate in that space. And so in talking about the HBCCs and the PBCCs, we now call them the Great Eight. We have given them a name for our historically Black and predominantly Black community colleges. And one of the things that I did learn in the process of this network and just doing research on them, which was very troubling to find, there is no research on them. And so that again was very sad for me to see that as long as these institutions have existed, you do not find case studies on them. So again, we did not wait for someone to say, okay, well, we'll do it. We decided we'll do it ourselves. And so we partnered with the ECMC Foundation and a Center for Innovation of Post-Secondary Education. And now our grade 8 institutions in our state will be the first to put case studies in the world around historically Black and predominantly Black community colleges. So again, Alabama is leading the way on bringing attention to these institutions that serve students who are from under-resourced families, first generation, and usually students of color, who are usually not seen as to be successful or to be seen as college-going students. But yet they always create a path for them at these institutions. And unfortunately, a lot of times with very limited resources. And so this work around these case studies is to elevate the amazing work that they do, even though they have limited resources. And so we're hoping that that will change that narrative for them of always having to say we do a lot with a little. We want them to not have to continue to say that. And so we know when you share your good stories and your good works, usually good follows. And that's what we're hoping that these case studies will do for these 8 institutions, is that good will follow them, that people will invest again in these institutions that are doing amazing work, getting people into our workforce. They are working hand in hand with business and industry to create those stackable credentials to get people into the workforce, but yet there's no investment going into the institutions. And so that's what we're hoping these case studies will do. And we just hosted the nation's first conference for these institutions earlier this month on February 8th and 9th. And we did it here in Mobile, Alabama, in our state. And it was just amazing. We had the founder of the Thurgood Marshall, who's here. She was one of our speakers, the director of the Complete College America, the Payne Center of Social Justice. It was just an amazing people that came out to support this. And now we're proud to say for the first time ever, community colleges have now been welcomed into the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. And it was our 6, all 6 in our state. So now I'm working on the other 2, which is a predominantly Black community colleges. We want to make sure that they have a space in a Thurgood Marshall College Fund as well. And so we're in conversation of closing that gap. But again, Alabama is leading the way in bringing attention to how do we make sure that we elevate these institutions that have been forgotten. And so I want to pause real quick to make sure, and hopefully I don't have any questions. I think I got just a couple minutes here, and I'm going to go real quick through the advocacy that we're focused on. Okay, so 2 areas of that we focus on advocacy is college affordability, of course, and then what we call the stranded workforce. And I'll tell you what that means briefly. So again, the advocacy, as you could tell, is very broad. So college affordability, of course, that's universal FAFSA, which we've already passed in our state. Double Pell, which we're still very much working on at the federal level because the cost of college continues to rise, but yet the Pell Max Award grant does not. And so we are definitely working very hard to, and very much pushing for them to double Pell. And then, of course, simplify FAFSA. They've done it, but it's been chaotic. So we're hoping that, yes, once they get the kinks out of the simplified FAFSA, it would be a win for us. But we always tell everyone with changes comes pain points. And so we're hoping, just asking everyone to be patient through that process. But please always send, if you're working with students through that FAFSA, please even let us know if there's issues that you have, because we're elevating it to the feds instantly. Every day we send them a list of things that are happening so they can fix it in their system. They're utilizing us as one of the organizations to hear from about what are the challenges that families and students are facing in completing the FAFSA. So please, if you come across any, give them to us, because we're elevating them straight to FSA. And so again, I want to just talk about what the stranded workforce looks like. So this is about removing that financial barrier to the stranded workforce who are adults that have some college and no degree. Right now, our state has about 45.7 Alabamians who have some valuable credential, but yet we've left them stranded because we are keeping them from going back to finishing either their credential or their degree. So the first thing we proposed was a scholarship for our state. Now I have to say I was very happy last year that we did get Senate Bill 175 passed. I'll be honest, I didn't think it would pass into this year, but we got it across the finish line last year, which now this year gives adults $3,000 for 4 year and $1,500 per term for a 2 year if you want to go back to school, but you have to have some college and no degree. So we're really excited that we started that conversation and that's now moving. But we still have another challenge. Transcript withholding is a huge, huge practice in our state. And it really prevents adults from being able to go back and finish that degree. And so I have used this scenario with many, many times that we just had 6,200 adults that wanted to go back and they did the minimum credit hours of 6. This is the net revenue that can be generated across institutions in our state because they still have to pay for the credit courses that they're going to take. And so the debt that you're forgiving them by not withholding their transcript really generates money for the institutions. And so we have to help institutions understand, and even our state have to understand that we have to figure out how to forgive those dollars and figure out a process to get those back in so they can finish and have upward mobility in our state. And so, of course, the challenge is, we must not leave them stranded. We've got to get them back. And of course, I wanted to touch on real quickly about one of the bills that you brought up was Senate Bill 129. We are working very hard to help college advisors understand what this means for them because they've been calling our office. They're worried because they support students in and out of state who have to do absentee ballots because they usually can't go vote for whatever reasons. And now they're worried their jobs are going to be in jeopardy. And so, we really appreciate any of you who, share your voice on the concern of that because it truly is impacting them. And they're truly concerned if they can no longer support students on their campus in that space. And so here's a question that I want to close with is how do you scale success strategies that close equity gaps as the needle moves for all? Now, I know we can't do any engagement here, but I just want you to, if you can think about what does this say? And do you know what that means? Even though it's halfway covered up, do you know what that is? And so I don't know if anyone could put in the chat real quick or just tell me.
I mean,
And so,
yeah. Oh,
and so
I was
again,
wrong.
here's the thing that you're supposed to be wrong because initially our brain processes just enough of what we see from memory. It's a bias that we have. And so initially you probably saw neuroscience for kids. And so, but that is just about how do we pause in moments when we're doing strategy work, when we're doing policy work, how do we make sure we put our biases at peace and begin to look at it from the voice of the people and making sure that we're not coming in with preconceived notions or when we see or hear things that remind us of something that we quickly answer it in a way that we think we should have answered because we've answered that way all along. And so this is the work that I challenge my team all the time. When we introduce new work, new policies, I always say, okay, where is this coming from? Is this a bias? Or is this from the voice of the people that we've heard from? And so I just want to close and say that I want to make sure that, the work that all of you all are doing, which is so important, that you just make sure that you challenge not only yourself, but those who are around you to make sure that we do not always bring our biases into the room because we want to make sure that we're doing the work of the people that we serve.
All right. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Scott. I wanted to just ask real quickly, is there any way that our membership can volunteer with Alabama Possible, get involved with y'all's work, best support y'all's work? Anything you want to suggest to us to how we can best help you?
Absolutely. So, of course, I mentioned the poverty simulations. We always love to have individuals from colleges to participate in that and help as volunteers in the communities that we're in. So if you ever want to do that, please let us know. We'll be glad to plug you into that work. Of course, when we're looking to champion and to support any other advocacy work, look to us, especially when it's supporting higher ed. We'll be glad to be that other voice in that space along with you. So we're definitely opening that door up for you to reach out to us for that. But again, it's really about just becoming champions for each other, in my opinion. And so if any way we can support you, we definitely ask that you reach out to us as well. But definitely, we're always looking for volunteers for our poverty simulations. And of course, when we're trying to be champions for students across the state, we always would need other voices, especially for sign-on letters, and hopefully you can support us in that way.
Absolutely. Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I think Ms. Scott put it great in the fact that we are not, even though we are competitors in many cases, we work much better together for our students when we work together. And I think that's for all of our Alabama members on today, as well as just throughout the region for SACAC as a whole. That's always good to remember. So thank you so much for coming out to chat with us today. Tell us a little bit more about Alabama Possible, what you guys are doing. And of course, thank you so much for your time on just with us today in this webinar.
I appreciate it. And again, I'm sorry that I'm under the weather, but I did not want to miss this opportunity. And so I appreciate you, and I hope your advocacy day is going well for you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yes, ma'am.
Take care.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to end our session today with just the SACAC updates I mentioned, but I also wanted to just kind of leave you with some tools in your tool belt in case, if this is your first time doing government advocacy work, if you're, a new SACAC member or anything like that, or if it's you joined because you literally know nothing about government and this is what you wanted to learn about today. I wanted to share some resources for you guys online so that way you can see how best to not only get involved with SACAC, but also just learn a little bit more about your government and how it works for you and how you can contact your representatives. So as with almost any organization these days, Alabama's legislator does have a website. I sounded really old when I said that, but Alabama's legislator does have a website. And so this is where you can find all of those bills that I showed, as well as many, many more, the texts that are involved with that, the sponsors with those bills. And then also, if you have no idea who your representative is, or maybe things have changed since the last election, or you kind of want to see when these different sessions are, when there are certain, committee meetings, or who's part of certain committees in the House and the Senate. This is a resource for you. Frankly, when I first got on this, it's a little hard to follow for me just because there's a lot of different buttons, but they have updated it in the last couple of years here where it's a little bit more friendly. So one of the most useful tools on here is the Find My Legislator button. And so this basically just helps you find your legislator as well as just any legislator within a certain area of this map. Now, this is not the most, I guess, precise tool in the world, just because you click on a certain square and it will provide you information within that square. It also breaks things down on kind of like well, this is state, or rather federal congressional districts. But basically, this would give you, for whatever reason, it's not working for me super well right now. I had it pre-pulled up, so let's see. Well, I guess not. We'll let it try to do its thing. But for right now, basically, it would pull up over here anybody who represents that certain area that you've clicked on, whether it be state representative, judicial representative, with here in the state of Alabama. Here we go. As well as, obviously the state level organization. So governor, lieutenant governor, all that good jazz. Those judicial offices for that particular area. And then also state senate. So if you don't know what district you're in, you click in your area where you live. So maybe you live over here in Inslee and Birmingham. Your senator is going to be Linda Coleman Madison, and state senator, excuse me, and your district would be District 20. State Board of Education, Yvette Richardson, and then House District with Wanda Lynn Given, and District 60. And so this kind of just gives you a good idea as to who you can contact in case you want to contact one of your representatives, and really just gives you everything in one easy to reference place as well too. So all the way up to Senate level, state level government as well. Another thing on here, like I mentioned too, is just where you can find all those different bills as well as, sorry, looking down here. So the bills that were referenced, so you do have the ability to log in and save your bills too as well. But search by different bill type. If you know, you've heard a lot about SB 129, for example, you can easily search that to find that particular bill instead of having to go through this entire thing. Here, I may have accidentally typed that incorrectly. But basically you can find all that about those different bills and kind of look into a little bit more about that, the history of it, when it went into committee, all that good jazz, amendments that have been added to it at any point. And then also obviously the actual text of the bill as well too here. So when it was introduced and as passed at certain points. So this is just really kind of good base level information on how you can best educate yourself when it comes to legislation in the state of Alabama. One other tool I wanted to mention before we get into SACAC updates is Ballotpedia. This is really just kind of, it's like a wonky site, and I mean that not as that it doesn't work. I mean, if you're a policy wonk and a nerd, this is a really good thing to reference for national level as well as local level legislation, as well as just figuring out who your representatives are. It also gives you up-to-date information about elections, kind of the status of those, who's running in certain elections, things like that. So it just kind of helps you keep up to date with everything going on, because at a certain point, things get really, really hard to keep up with. Now, speaking about elections too, next week is Super Tuesday. And so next Tuesday specifically, that's going to be March 5th. Yes, March 5th. And so that is Alabama's primary. So if you're a registered Alabama voter, next week is a time to vote. Polls are typically open 7 to 7. So I really encourage you, if you have not already registered to vote, please do so via the Secretary of State's website. And then, of course, the primary election is next week. So definitely get yourself out to the polls if you didn't already have plans to do so. Now, final thing for you guys today too is SACAC updates. So like I mentioned, we don't have too many SACAC updates specifically that haven't already been covered by NACAC updates when it comes to policy. But I just wanted to remind you guys that you are always have the ability to volunteer with SACAC. One of the easiest ways to find out how to volunteer and get involved with the committee is filling out the interest form. So you can find that under the About SACAC on SACAC.org, going to volunteering for SACAC, and then of course filling out the volunteer form. And so basically we have different committees with a wide variety of different topics. This would ask you about what state you're from, as well as what you're interested in particular, and also gives you a breakdown of what organization type you're part of, whether it be CBO, 2-year, private, public, 4-year, doesn't really matter. And then also just kind of SACAC committee reference guide too. So if you don't know what committees there are, I'll give it a second here. If you don't know what committees there are, you can find that on the SACAC website as well too. And so there we go. Took a little bit of a second. So admissions practices, advancement, annual conference. If you are more into planning, if you're more into just regular upkeep of things going on, there are different things for different people out there. And of course, if you just need to learn a little bit more about these different organizations, all of our content information can be found both at the board level as well as the state level on the website too, depending on what committee you're looking at. So once again, government relations, you can find us on this page. So Kelly Pitkavich, as well as Jay DeMay, as I mentioned, then all of our state level members as well too. So maybe if you're joining us from outside the state of Alabama, you don't know who your person is, you can find all of our contact information here. This is really regularly updated. Typically, these committee members are on board for at least 3 years. And so you'll always have that person to reach out to, as well as links for, once again, those different helpful government links, depending on what your state is as well. Keep in mind, we try to do this day on the Hill, or day at the Capitol, I guess you should say. We're on Goat Hill, so we'll call it that, here in Alabama. But we try to do this around the same time every single year. Typically, we'll either opt for a webinar or in person, and a webinar kind of mix. It just kind of depends on how things are going, and of course, the interest we have. So if you have anybody in your offices who's interested in joining us, or if you're interested in volunteering with us, feel free to reach out. Like I said, you can find our contact information down here. I'll even put that in the chat as well too. Obviously, well, it's not going to show you right here, but my email is awcolson@uab.edu. And then Bailey's is going to be BEDRUM00. I always say bedroom, like red rum, just because it's the fun thing to say, at uab.edu as well too. We are always looking for people to help us be part of our committee, be part of our regular volunteering work. And of course, if you're interested in these other committees, I'm personally involved in about 2 other committees through SACAC as well too. So I love getting involved in SACAC. It's a good way to connect with people throughout the region. So definitely feel free to do so. With all that said, any last comments, updates for you? Cool. I've talked a lot, and so frankly, I'm tired, and I'm sure you're tired of hearing me. But I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us. Wanted to thank all of our speakers for joining us as well too. Once again, I've put in the chat here alabamapossible.org/alabamacan if you wanted to join their events happening in April. And then also CJ Powell's email, cpowell@nacacnet.org. That's Powell with 2 L's. So feel free to reach out and join our friends who spoke today. And I just want to thank you guys again so much for joining us. Thank you again for being part of this work. And I just want to encourage all of us, government relations is not fun. It's not easy, but it is definitely something incredibly important to our day-to-day lives. This is America at work, democracy at work. And so it is imperative that, if you're not fully involved, you're at least somewhat informed. And so hopefully you come away today a little bit more informed, and hopefully you come away today a little bit more enticed to be involved even more, maybe than you already are. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and sign off here, and I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday and go vote next Tuesday. Have a great day, y'all.